story. I am beyond privileged and excited to introduce my next guest, RJ, who has a really powerful story about forgiveness. And most importantly, and what I love is that RJ had to come to self-forgiveness because the
Mm.
reality is we all carry burdens, and until we release them, we remain stuck in suffering. And so, RJ, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
My great pleasure, Carrie. Thank you for this and look forward to seeing where we have our conversation lead to.
Yeah. So, something that struck me immediately when I was put in touch with you by Steve is that you show up in service to others, which aligns with how I show up in the world. So, can you talk to me about what led you to show up in service to people?
Yeah, never had that question and certainly not the first one in. I think a big piece of where my servant or service mindset came from was I was raised middle class. I was raised in a very loving home and I was raised to look for others and take care of others and to try to be supportive and helpful. And somewhere along the way, um, I got myself kind of misaligned with what the most important thing or person or relationship in every endeavor was. And I started putting myself first. And through that led quite a bit of chaos, led to some terrible choices that hurt quite a few people, damaged a community, damaged marriages. But going through those trials and going through and learning about myself, why I did what I did, and some of the blessings that came from like pain, loss, suffering, shame, guilt. Some of the positives that came out, of course, were like identity, forgiveness, relationship with God, and that idea to no longer put myself first, but I like to say I put myself third now, where first is God, second's the person directly in front of me that I'm communicating or relating with, and then myself's third. So that's kind of the Cliff's Notes version of where my servant mindset and goal for serving others was born.
So we'll dig in a little bit into your backstory in a minute, but
Yep.
as somebody who truly believes you have to serve source, God, whatever a person believes, right? Because I also study the science behind spirituality. So some people can talk about it in energetic form rather than God. I'm fine with either. But also before serving another, I personally feel that it's important that I serve myself in an altruistic way so that I can be an open vessel to serve others. So I'm curious what your thoughts are and how you've come to a place where you prioritize the person in front of you before yourself.
I certainly don't always hit the mark. I've noticed in the past if I don't take care of myself physically, if I'm not in prayer, if I'm not in good relationship with family and support people, that it can tend to go towards some unhealthy living, unhealthy choices, which if you're not in a good headspace yourself, if you're not making wise decisions and putting the right priorities in place, you're going to be of no real value, certainly positive value to other people. So I hear what you're saying. It is awfully important to be able to unwind, dive down, and get inside of what's really going on in our own hearts, inside of our own minds. And so I do put quite a bit of emphasis on self care. Love to go for walks, tons of prayer walks, love to have time at the gym. And I think if I can align and have those quiet times or me times, then when I do get into a situation like this or at work, or if I'm in front of a group or just in your normal everyday, and like you just know someone's been put in front of you for a reason, hopefully you're lined up, you're prayed up, as some people would say, and you're able to be a vessel to show love, to show respect, to show joy, opportunities, all those positive words. Because a lot of times there's really only three interactions that are going to happen. It's going to make a positive impact on the person in front of you, a negative one, and very rarely is it just a non-impact. So you get the choice. You have the decision to help them smile and find joy, or be a little bit of a grump in front of them and they leave going, that was terrible. Don't know why I like running into that guy.
Well, that's beautifully said. And I appreciate that you articulated the self-care aspect, because I, much like you, I have a very stringent spiritual routine that I spend in prayer and in self-care for 5 hours before I ever go out into the world in the day, because it's critical to me that, like you, I'm able to be a vessel of love, whatever that looks and feels like. And on days where I am not consistent, I, like you, miss the mark. And it's really important to me that we as servant leaders, nurture ourselves so that we can show up in service to others. So thank you for that. And for anybody in the community, I know you hear me say it a lot, but here's yet one more person who shows up in service to people talking about self-care. Okay, so you mentioned that you come from a middle-class home, you grew up with love. I'm curious,
Yep.
did you grow up with faith in your home?
The beauty of hindsight now, I can see how my mother and father lived. So the answer now would be yes, but it was not always hearing about, seeing, reading. We weren't your going to church on Sunday family. We weren't pulling out the Bible and doing any studies together. And that's no fault of them. It's just the way it was. But now knowing and seeing how I've chosen to live, and I guess you could say my trajectory and the path that I took to come to know the Lord, and being able to have that conversation with my mother and father, it's like, well, okay, now that makes a little bit more sense. And one of the coolest things I've gotten in my last 3-4 years is I went home to hang out with mom and pops, and I stumbled upon my dad's Bible that he carried with him every day. He went to work for like 30 some years when he was driving a train, and there's notes all through it. It's highlighted. And now that he has readers, he's like, I don't need that Bible. I can barely see the words anymore. So I just use the one on my phone. You can have it. So it's probably one of my most prized possessions. And it's cool to know all that time how he was living, learning, reading. So hindsight, yeah, definitely it was a faith-centered home, but wasn't communicated.
Yeah, I just asked because I didn't grow up that way either, and I fell into faith, through trials and tribulations, much like yourself. I'm always curious, and I like the audience to have some insight, because so often, there's this belief that it's too late. It's too late to try a new thing. It's too late to connect with something that seems a little out there, scary, some higher power. So I was just interested to hear that. So thank you for sharing. So you went to prison, right? That's really ultimately where you were able to find healing.
Yep.
And talk to me a little bit about what that experience was, having had such I don't mean to say privileged, but a rather comfortable life than going into prison.
Both privileged and comfortable would both be fair words. So you nailed that. And if you're looking at a Venn diagram where the two circles kind of intersect between how I grew up and how life was in prison, there wasn't a whole lot that was going to prepare me for the culture shock, personality changes of those around me, the treatment from other prisoners, and also treatment from some of the officers. There was a lot of great people that worked there, that lived there, but the first couple of years were a little rough. And I think if I'm looking at that Venn diagram of like, what are the overlapping themes or aspects that had any sort of similarity, it was the ability to communicate and the ability to try to see the good in people. That's how I was raised. That was always kind of one of my, I guess you could call it like superpowers, was I've never ran out of words to say. I've never really met a stranger. Everybody I kind of come in contact with, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and just try to be happy and joyful and a friend. That can be both very good and also very, very bad in prison. And so to kind of single in and like dig a little deeper into that, I gave a lot of people the benefit of the doubt. I was probably more trusting than I should have been early on. And prison's a rough place. I mean, there's no other way to phrase that. And trying to be as honest and trying to be as positive and hopeful as one could be going in with a 20-year prison sentence, I found myself in some pretty scary situations. There's gangs that got involved, a couple different instances. Certain gangs tried to kill me because of my crime. Being a sex offender inside of a prison is, well, being anything inside of a prison is not great, but that falls further down on the rung as far as like prison hierarchy and politics. It's just like a real bad all male high school. There's cliques, there's groups, there's bullying. And so taking how I grew up and having so many friends and such a good time in my youth and my high school and all that, as far as like just being honest and going out there and trying to make friends, that didn't really land very well right off the bat in prison.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, since you mentioned it, so you went to prison for a crime that was related to sexual assault.
Yep. High school teacher, sexual assault on a student.
Okay. And for my community, who is probably a little bit taken aback, maybe, knowing that I'm a 2-time rape survivor, one of the reasons I really wanted to interview you is, for me, showing up through the lens of love and compassion is showing up for all people who, because of our human experience, makes mistakes. And so I really want to highlight for anybody who might condemn RJ right off the bat, you know, I was a victim of sexual assault, and I was able to reconcile and forgive my perpetrators. And I hope that throughout the rest of this conversation, you can suspend your judgment enough to learn how RJ has since really made reparations, but more importantly, you know, committed to showing up and helping other people heal so that they can make the reparations and heal from their own wounds, right? Because hurt people. At the end of the day, we don't just go out to hurt somebody. So sure, you may have come from affluence, sure, you may come from privilege, but the reality is you didn't say, I'm just going to go wound this person or wound this family or hurt these people. There was something inside you internally suffering, and as a result created this storm, this situation in which you made choices, in my mind, to numb that suffering, and as a result, you know, ended up hurting yourself as well as others. I just want to preface that for people. So what I'm hearing is you went into the prison and kind of was honest. Hey, I'm in prison for XYZ, and people are like, ooh, no. Is that correct, or am I misunderstanding?
Not completely. I was definitely scared, and so I tried the whole being secretive. Like, I was honest about where I came from and what I did as a profession and where my family was from, and I was honest about all those things, but always was told like, hey man, don't share what you did. It's not going to be good. And so I tried making up other stories, and I laugh now because I didn't even know enough about prison to how to even lie effectively. Like my lies were ridiculous and people
Yeah.
noticed it right away. And so after a week led to one of the murder attempts. After 9 months after that, it led to another one. Once I got moved around and started to witness God kind of do some things, because I didn't have a relationship with the Lord going in.
Yeah.
I had an ego and I had a mindset that I'm the smartest person in every room and you guys need to listen to me. I have some ideas and I would like to be moved and I'd like to be taken care of in this manner. And well, first off, prison doesn't care about your opinion. And second off, those are all very dangerous mindsets. And that's why I was inside of a prison. Like
Yeah.
clearly I wasn't the smartest person probably in any room, let alone out in the community. But once I found a couple mentors, once I began to hear and feel and see the love of Christ in me, around me, then I began to finally like say, I'm comfortable being uncomfortable. So I was at that point able to, I wasn't just standing up on the rooftop like saying, this is what I did. Come and talk to me. I've
Yeah.
got all
Yeah.
the answers. But I wasn't trying to lie about it. So if someone approached, if someone asked, I'd tell the truth. By the fifth, sixth year, there was zero fear. Like I have now been walking with the Lord and I'd seen him do so many things that there were some fearful moments, but I was no longer trying to like walk and make sure that people didn't notice who I was or ask any questions. That had long kind of passed with having experienced the things I did and seeing the things I saw. And that's kind of what's all throughout the book. God doesn't waste a thing is the title of the book. And I totally believe that. Learning through the fear and how God didn't waste the murder attempts or waste my inability to walk on my own 2 feet or my belief that I was the only person who's going to be able to make this prison time successful. All of those things were inaccurate, but God's not going to waste those times to have them be like the platform, the building blocks, the foundation for all the glory and all the joy that comes later. And so I know that
Right.
was a little bit of a longer answer to probably a more simple question, but the honesty came when my belief and confidence in my identity came.
That's actually a beautiful answer. And one that, again, I work with people who are steeped in addiction and severe mental health issues. And, that faith, that trust, that freedom from that like overwhelming, crippling fear, it really does slowly, it evolves as you heal, right? So you mentioned that you ended up getting mentors.
Yep.
How did you find Christ, God, source energy, whatever anybody wants to call an external connection with something greater than you, in prison?
The wonderful part is now, again, I've said this will be the second time, like the awesomeness of hindsight, God was showing up all throughout probably the first 2 years anyways. I just couldn't see it, had scales over my eyes, whatever version of an awakening you'd like to add to it. But my journey started with me laying on the train tracks in 2012 after I knew I was going to end up going to prison trying to kill myself. Train goes by on a different track. I didn't recognize that as God. I just recognized it as what the heck just happened. I knew it was on this track. How would it not go over me? After the second murder attempt, there was an amazing blessing. A certain officer pulls me out of a room like 45 minutes prior to when the murder was going to happen on my life. Didn't recognize that as God. I just recognize it as, well, that's awfully coincidental, and praise whoever that I'm out of this situation. So I say those things not lightly, but if I were to sit in those right now for a while, we probably wouldn't get to another question. So I get to the third prison, the one where the mentors are found, and I get there, and I've now been shuffled around for about 9 months to 10 months, treated pretty poorly, been called every name in the book, been threatened within an inch of my life, not once, but twice. And I still have this chip on my shoulder. Like, if someone would just listen to me, I'll tell them how they need to treat me and how this will go well for the next 19 years. I'm not even a year in. Well, I end up at a prison called Colorado Territorial, and something somehow, now I know it's the Holy Spirit, urged me to go down to the chapel. I wandered down there, ran into one of the chaplains who was in there, and I decided to just verbally vomit all over him how the God he believes in is mean, is probably not real, doesn't care about me. And I just told him all about the amazing things I did, which I think a lot of people sit in there and they struggle with that. Like, I've done these 900 things that are great, but this one thing is what is identifying me right now, is what's getting me punished, where I've been there. Like, we're not keeping checklists. You break the law, you're going to prison, especially if it's of the magnitude of what I did and some of the guys I was in there with. It doesn't look like, well, this one will take those 500 and cross them out. But at the time, I thought that was it. Like, I'm the one getting screwed over, which couldn't be further from the truth. So after I do this for like 30 minutes with him, he has me turn to the book of Job and read where God basically was like, Job, you're done. Where were you when I parted the waters and I separated the sky and the water? And where were you when I named all the animals? And something hit me like, oh, there actually is someone who is doing all of those things in the background. Mm-hmm. And it was at that moment where he introduced me to a younger chaplain, Chaplain Matt. And from that moment on, and still currently to this day, one of my best friends, still one of my mentors. But I set up weekly meetings to go and ask him questions about Bible and scripture, and how could this thing be, and how is this possible, and what does that mean for me and my shame and my guilt? And over the course of probably 25,000 questions and umpteen different opportunities for him to tell me to be quiet and leave, but he continued to show me nothing but love and grace, I came to experience the love of Christ and gave my life to the Lord. And that's kind of when like the mind shift changed. It's not about me anymore. It's about God and others. It's not about hurting and making excuses. It's about dealing with our past and finding love and joy in the midst of chaos and panic and tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. And so you mentioned two pretty profound miracles. And I have experienced and witnessed many, many miracles in my own journey, right, toward a deeper connection with Source God. And so you've built this relationship with this chaplain. Now you're facing 19 years. How, I guess, were you able to find forgiveness for yourself? Because so often we hear you got to forgive others. But what I found to be true is when you can forgive yourself, forgiveness of everyone else is like a given. That was my experience, because it's just easy. I can't condemn anybody. But what was your experience with being able to reconcile the choices you made and not let yourself off the hook by not taking responsibility, but letting yourself off that emotional torture?
Yeah, I doubt I'll be the first person on your podcast to say this, but it came with understanding the difference between guilt and shame. And I'm really thankful that I had as much time with these chaplains, Chaplain Matt, Chaplain Abner, Chaplain Troy, and one of the guys that worked with me in the chapel who's passed on. He died inside of the prison. His name was Mike. Because I had 3 years of like 8, 9, 10 hours a day with these guys to learn that. And I'll explain it before I even got to go and do sex offense treatment. So having the ability for the 3 years prior to treatment to be able to dive in and really understand who I was, what gets to label me, what gets to identify me, what gets to be my source of joy was huge. And so again, not inventing this definition, but to finally understand the difference between shame, which is I am a bad person, and guilt, I did a bad thing. Being able to reconcile those, like never letting myself off the hook. I am guilty. I did what I did. I alone made the choice. I was 100% responsible. Fact. I am guilty. The shame piece, though, that's what keeps you in your own prison cell. And I say that both as a free person now, but also remembering back inside, there'd be times where I would get into this shame cycle where I would leave myself in my actual prison cell for a couple days. Then maybe a few months later, it'd be a day and a half. And then a few months later, it'd be a day if I got triggered. And then maybe it was 5 hours or 3 hours. And now I have the blessing of recognizing guilt versus shame. And when I'm able to let myself out. And so that was the single biggest thing was it's not that simple just sitting in front of these two chaplains like, here's what I did. Here's how I feel. Thank you. Let's move on. I had to go through tons of prayer and tons of writing down everything that I was carrying around inside that I was ashamed of or that I was guilty of, and being able to confess it was huge. Like when you're in prison and you've been in the news for the worst thing you've ever done, that's a little freeing. Like most people in society, they'll share maybe 80%. They'll tell you they're sharing 95%. But honestly, they're never going to go out there and be like, this is the worst thing I've ever done. Here's my dirtiest of dirty laundry. That was done for me. That was taken out of my hands.
Yep.
So I always like to say, and it's what I try to do with the people that I try to mentor or those that still mentor me, and just those that I love, is being able to take the issues, the trauma, the shame, even those things that you're guilty of, and giving them to Jesus, giving them to God. Matt and Troy and Abner used to always say, like, lay it down at the foot of the cross. If you're holding something with a closed fist, he's not going to work in it because you're still acting like you have the power over it. It's not until you can open it up and say, okay, I recognize I did this, but this doesn't get to dictate my future or my purpose. I lay it down. That became the freeing moment of, all right, that's not mine to carry anymore. I'm moving on. I'm not going to allow rumors in the past to steal all my joy. I mean, I'm already inside of prison. May as well try to find some sort of joy and purpose inside of there, which is why the ministry is so important to me now, to help those inside. No, you don't get to be, you don't have to sit in there and be identified as your worst of worst moments.
I love that so much. And I think, interestingly enough, RJ, I think most people sit in a prison of their own making in their mind, whether or not they're behind bars. We inherently fixate and crucify ourselves for almost everything. And I think part of it is culture. I think it's societal norms. It's families we grow up in. And I tell people all the time, when are you going to allow yourself to let yourself off the hook and let it go, surrender? And something you said, I truly believe, when I get a thought of condemnation of myself, I immediately surrender it to the universe. I immediately say, God, I give this to you. And I don't need to know what's happening. I just know that I let it go. And sometimes, much like you, I have to let it go 2,500 times. I have to make a choice to continuously be like, nope, letting that go. Nope, letting it go. And in that process, you do free yourself from that emotional, consuming just pervasive suffering that comes with guilt and shame. One thing I'm gonna um lovingly disagree with you on is coming from a place of studying energy and studying spirituality through energy and quantum physics. Each emotion we carry has a megahertz, it has a vibration out into the universe, and we know that as humans we're all energy. Guilt is just one notch up against shame. So it's apathy, shame, guilt, right? And so even in guilt, I encourage people to get curious. Okay, so you went and you punched that person in the face. Instead of feeling guilty, let's get curious. What precipitated you going and engaging in that behavior? And when you can kind of even remove the guilt and you just go to curiosity and freedom from judgment, well, then you can learn, much like you did, a lot about yourself, a lot about your triggers, a lot about some of the experiences in the past that you may never identified as painful, but that kind of built into the choices you made in that moment. And so, but I love everything you're saying. And so you were able to, really kind of put down your cross. And so how long did you spend in prison?
Just under 7 years on a 20-year sentence. Yeah, got out in 2020.
So how would you, okay, so I'm going to keep it real. I am immersed in multicultural communities. My significant other is a Black man and you're a white man. And I just want to speak to the fact that there are some people who might say you got out of prison because you're a white man, but if you were a Black man or a Puerto Rican man or some other man, you'd still be sitting in prison. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
It's a topic that comes up quite a bit. I'm not shy at communicating about it, but I'm not the smartest and the most educated to like talk statistics. I know a lot of guys of different backgrounds, from the Mexicans, Blacks. There were no shortage of people who were denied when they went to parole, and there was no, I guess you could say, similarities of those who were released. For me, I know that I was released because of just a list of miracles that were put into place, getting through treatment, having the blessing of being able to speak at my parole, having successfully completed and had some support on the streets. Those things helped me be able to get released. It's impossible for me to try to guess, had I been of a different background, would I have been denied or sentenced for more years? Or I don't even know how I would begin to jump into that. I know I have a lot of friends, both Black and white, that have been released in the last 3 years, and awesome blessing. But unfortunately, there's also quite a few of them that have been denied.
Yeah. So, well, I would say here's why I bring that up. It's not to start this race topic. It really is about your surrender, right? Because much like you said, when we try to control a narrative, and let me use my own story as an example, right? Because it ties into this belief that, not belief, because I have witnessed it, but the idea that, some people don't get or are denied services that others are. I could have sat in the suffering of the experiences I did. But when I started to trust in a higher power, it changed who I was bringing into my life. Mm-hmm. Because when you heal, you operate from a higher energy, right? Whether you believe in Christ consciousness, which I study the Bible, but I also study a myriad of different religions. So I get it. Or whether you believe in just energy, if you sit in anger, if you sit in condemnation, if you sit in feeling like a victim, then that's a low vibrating energy. And guess what you're attracting? You're attracting that energy. But if you heal and you come from a place of love, much like you, much like me, much like a lot of, I imagine, your friends who were released, well, then you attract energy of that same caliber. So I say this for people who are watching and might ask, am I suggesting that there isn't disparity? No. But am I also suggesting that we have the power to kind of help ourselves along by healing ourselves and then open up to possibilities you might not have believed possible in the beginning? I do believe that. And so that's why I asked the question, because you did come from a place of love.
That's a very fair point, and I don't think I'll be breaking the internet if I say that the Department of Corrections or the judicial system is perfect. It's absolutely the opposite. It's flawed. It's usually a place of darkness and mismanaged opportunities. Corrections is usually one of the furthest things, I think, if you were to like rut out what their like mission and vision is. They'll probably have it in their mission statement, but it's certainly not the top of the bullets. So for me, I know like the first 2, 3, 4 years, I probably asked my mom, my dad, who have no opinion and certainly no impact on when I was getting released, like, when do you think I'll get out? And then I started asking Chaplain Matt and Troy, like, so when do you guys think I'll get denied? And it's like, bro, you're not even going up for parole for like 4 more years. What are we even talking about? It was weird because after I had left territorial, left those chaplains, and had to go learn how to walk on my own and how to trust God on my own and where my identity was really found. Funniest thing was, I remember going to a meeting and asking, hey, when am I going to get into treatment so that I have the opportunity to get out of prison? And I was told, you probably won't. You're 100 years back on the wait list. And how I responded was like, okay, like, I'm okay here.
Yeah.
I know I have friends. I know my family on the streets love me. I know I have a purpose. There's people here I'm trying to shepherd and love, and there's people here who are shepherding and loving me. So it was like, okay, that's what it is. It wasn't until, like you said, I let it go and just kind of started living there. Like, how am I going to use these 24 hours to love the person in front of me? How am I going to try to make my life a little bit better than it was yesterday, today? And it's funny because there's a couple stories I never, ever share, ever. I don't know why. Probably because they're not like the big ticket ones. Like if you're going through my book, the ones where you're going to bookmark it, be like, that story is incredible. But this one's always really impactful for me. When I was at Territorial, I've now started witnessing, I've seen massive miracles. I've seen people who don't talk sing. I've seen people who have holes in their body be healed in a day. But there was one time, one morning, where I was getting ready to put my sheets in because they had to be washed every week. And surprisingly, some people didn't choose to do that. That's just some of the laziness of prison. But in early that morning, two roommates ended up having a horrible, massively violent fight in their cell. It's not even 7 o'clock, Carrie. We're not even going to breakfast yet. And these two have got blood all over everywhere. And cops find out. They end up locking us down, which is not uncommon. They're going to figure out if this is a gang thing, is there something else that might pop off in other parts of the prison? But we're locked down. And when we're locked down, that means it cancels all of the services, all of the programs, all the volunteers. That's just the way it goes. Later on in that day, about 3, 4 p.m., the cops came to my door because I was in charge of setting up the services in the chapel. And they said, hey, got to get you up, man. You need to go set up the service. It's like, well, we're locked down. We're not going to have a service. He's like, I just got a call from the captain, man. Just go set up the service. I'm like, okay. And so I head on down there with my buddy Mike. And this story I'll sum up a little bit. We're down there, we get it all prepared, and they let this guy come in. Pastor Raul comes in, and we asked him, we're like, how'd this happen? Like, didn't they call you? Because you drove 3 hours. He's like, yeah, but I figured I was already planning on coming down. So I just came and parked in the parking lot. And I prayed over the church and I prayed over the prison. And someone saw me walking out, a captain, and was like, what are you doing here, parked in the parking lot? And he goes, well, I was going to be here anyway, so it doesn't stop my night. I'm still going to pray for these guys and show up for them and be loving. So he's like, that's pretty cool. Let's have your service. So everything else is canceled in the whole prison, Carrie. And they make an announcement that says the only controlled movement is if you want to go to the chapel for this service. So for some people, this is the only time they're going to get out of their cell and get some fresh air for the day. So two dudes, two gangbangers who wouldn't come within 100 feet of this chapel start walking down just to be like little knuckleheads, and they walk in. Well, Carrie, here's what happens. They sit in there and they hear Pastor Raul preaching and talking about the gospel and talking about forgiveness and love, and that you don't have to sit in your own mud for the rest of your life. You can step out of that, come and be washed clean and accept the love of Jesus and just experience what joy he has for you. And that very night, Carrie, one of those guys gave his life to the Lord. Mm-hmm. So the book's called God Doesn't Waste a Thing, again, because he didn't create that fight in the morning, but he's not going to waste it, because that's the lockdown that got those two guys to come in there and forever change their lives. And what about their kids' lives if they get on the phone and say, hey, I'm done gangbanging?
Yep.
I was witnessing that, and that was far enough along in my journey to be able to step back and say, okay, God, you're doing something now. That was one of those that I saw right away.
Yep.
So that helps me 4 years later when they tell me I have 100 years to go on a sentence to get into treatment. It's like God can work in 1 hour, or he can work in a 20-year prison sentence. It allows me to just be like, he's got this. It'll work out.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I am currently reading the memoir of a yogi, and he talks much about miracles, very similar to you. And again, I've experienced them myself, numerous miracles. And for me, our job is not to figure out the how. It's just to trust that it will all fall into place. So you spend 7 years in prison, you get out in 2020. It's been 3 years. You alluded to writing a book, which I would love for you to share with the community as we wrap up. But yeah, what is your passion now? So what is your purpose? What has God led you to do for people?
Love the opportunity. Started a ministry called Not My Will Ministries. I'm sure you'll probably put it in the links here, notmywillministries.com. And the two main mission statements, if you will, is the one to encourage and share with the community and with society that God is still in the miracle business. I feel a lot of people just being like, oh yeah, the guy's rich, so why wouldn't that happen? Or yeah, doctors are great, so that's why the medical thing happened. God still does miracles. When you're inside a prison and you see limited resources, there's only really one way to give glory, and that's to point to God. So one, share with the community that God's in the miracle business. But two, if I do one well enough, if I can encourage and invite the community to step in, fundraise, donate $100 a month so that I can do two, which is to encourage and support and fund and share with those men that are still incarcerated that their address doesn't dictate their future. Their wardrobe doesn't dictate their value. Their current number instead of their name doesn't dictate their purpose. And so that takes money, that takes funding, that takes time for me to go and visit and share and love and send in phone time and shampoo and hygiene items. So it's this weird mix of like loving and caring for and encouraging those who often sit in darkness most hours of the day, and also going and showing the light and the positive of a dark prison to get the people in the community to say, that's something I want to step into. My normal $50 tithe a month to go to the local food bank or the local church, that's excellent. Keep doing it. But I challenge you to donate 50, 100 bucks, 1,000 for some people a month, because that money will make it possible for men inside to feel and experience the love of Jesus and to share it back out with their family who is at home thinking, why is dad not called? Why is my husband not doing better? And it's weird. The more I have this conversation, the more I have this ask, people have come with like two responses to that. One, man, that's great. That's really exciting. I bless you in that. Good job. But then they never financially step in because they just don't. And I think it's because of two. I think there's this mind shift or mindset. I need to get it shifted that they're in prison. They shouldn't have things. They shouldn't be able to experience joy. They did what they did. That's their punishment. But that needs to be shifted. And that's why I would encourage people to email me, find a way to get a hold of the book or to get onto my website. And let's have a conversation about why you think men and women, for that matter, who are incarcerated don't still have human value and deserve human dignity or the ability to take a shower with a bottle of shampoo versus a broken off corner of the used bar of soap.
Yeah.
So that's the hump I'm trying to get over, of getting people to realize humans are humans. Period.
Well, I think, let me just try to touch that point. The reality is again, most people externally are still in their own prison of their own making too. And nobody purposefully is egocentric, have become apathetic, or stuck in their own guilt shame loop, which they are. Like, you look at the world as a whole and it speaks volumes, right? Much like you say, God's in the miracle business, but there are just so many people who they have so disconnected from the idea of a tangible results orientated relationship with source. And so fear plays a huge role. Like, I don't think that they cognizantly think, oh, let this person suffer. It's just, that person scares me and I'm not going to try to touch them with a 10-foot pole because I'm over here dealing with my own guilt and shame. And if I look at that person, well, I might actually have to look at my own, because we're all human. We all make mistakes. And, like you, I've blasted all my dirty laundry on social, because the reality is I can't tell people to move through and own their stuff if I'm not willing to share, the poor behavior that I've taken part in when I wasn't well, when I was hurt and suffering. So, but I'm happy to have that conversation with you again, because this has been a great dialogue. And I think that, it is important. I think if I were to say, I would give people insight as to what it's like to experience prison. I believe prison is for reparation. I believe it's to teach skills. I believe it's to impart hope. I really believe that it should be a place where people can rehabilitate and then pay it forward. But that we live in a privatized system where people are making money off of prisoners. So there's, much like you said, there's a lot wrong with it. And I think part of that is we've conditioned society to kind of, you go over there and I don't have to think about you. Because if I think about you, I got to think about me and my mess.
Yeah. Yep. I've yet, and this is probably I hate making like the always and never and 100% and zero. I don't think I've ever met anyone who's came from the community and went and volunteered for a softball game or to a Bible study or to an event where they've went inside of a prison and experienced the brightness, the joy, the encouragement from the guys some of them are going to die in there. and then they come out and go, that was a waste of time.
Yeah.
Every single one in my circle comes out and is like, I hope I helped them because I really left there feeling encouraged and excited and wanting to go again. And that's the cool part, is knowing that when I was on the inside, when they'd leave, I'd be like, oh, that was amazing. Oh, so awesome just to know someone came in that cared enough to show up and to
Yeah.
ask me a question. But it's hilarious because then on the other side of it, the free person's like, man, they were so encouraging to me. It's exactly what you say. Until you're willing to go in and be like, let's have them impact me and I impact them, the game's changed. And that's real reparation, real healing, real change happens.
Well, I don't even believe, it's a visceral knowing within my soul that healing happens in communion. And when we can let down our walls, be vulnerable, and suspend our judgment around anything, race, sexual orientation, type of spirituality you practice, where you went to school, what economic background you have, then you're really able to connect with a person on their soul level. And you see that we are all connected. We all want love. We all want to give love, really.
Yep.
And so I guess my second to last question is this: what do you say for the person who's like, I'm condemned anyway. I fucked up, and I'm already burning in hell, so there's no point. I'm not going to believe in God. And I ask because for many years, based on some of the behavior and the choices I made, I stole, I was out of control, I had an abortion. I thought I was burning in hell. So what was the point in even trying to pray to somebody who was going to condemn me anyway?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and I think every time my answer is subtly different. But one, it's not my job to try to create Christians or Christ followers. Thankfully, all I'm called to do is to love them where they're at and to speak to them honestly. And one of my best friends used to tell me to get the F away from him for 3 years straight every time I talk about God or pray for him. Thankfully, I wasn't even there when he did give his life to the Lord, because I can take no credit for it whatsoever. But you say, what do I say to someone who says God is this or this is that? I would just say they're not a believer. And if I can break it down to just facts, like, yeah, that's what non-believers say. They also don't experience a lot of the amazing things of having the Holy Spirit living in and through them. So what I would say is, I still love you. And there's a lot of people who do. And there's a God that loves you, whether you believe it or not. And I'm willing to walk and talk and share and preach and pray if that's of interest to you.
Yeah.
And then I just
love that.
Let the rest of it take care of itself.
And I'm gonna, for the community, here's my thing. From all of the scripture I've read, guys, and this is from the Bible, Bhagavad Gita, Tao Te Ching, extensive research in spirituality. When you break down the greatest avatars, they all preach one thing. It's love and joy. Love and joy. So if you can show up through the lens of love, which I'm like you, my job isn't to preach. I don't care if you believe in the purple dinosaur. If that gets you to a place to move out of shame and guilt and lean into communion, connection with others, because that's where true healing occurs in whatever capacity, then that's great. As long as you're showing up in love for yourself and love for others, and that's all you got to do. But most people are so out of touch with loving themselves. And that's why I love what you're doing. And it's why I am passionate about what I do, is not to project and tell you who you have to believe in, but more that when you do learn to love yourself, then the universe, God, whatever purple dinosaur comes down and meets you and provides you with experiences you wouldn't otherwise have believed in. So I will leave that. So you have a book, you
Yep.
have this ministry, you're doing podcasts. Thank you so much for taking time for me. What is in your future, RJ, personally, as you continue to show up in service to others in the world?
I think what I want to try to push into is getting to the ministry 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I know that's impossible, but I love it. I love it so much. I feel like I'm home when I'm talking about him. I feel like I'm home when I'm talking about God. But I really want to try to push into creating like men's retreats inside of prisons. Knowing enough about how the prison system is set up and how they do lockdowns and the normal day-to-day activities, creating a full day or possibly a 2-day retreat style where clearly we're not taking you out of the prison, but we're going to have a 2-day break where we can just dive into our own mess, our own distortions, find out where the truth lies, get rid of some of those wrong feelings, draw closer to what our distortions shouldn't be. That's where I want to push into, and that's kind of the challenge. That's where some of the fundraising needs to come and some of the donors and supporters. And so as I do with a lot of the podcasts, anybody who jump on my website, donate 25, $50, put down that you heard about this through Carrie and her podcast, and I'll sign a copy of the book and send it out there to you. I'd love to have this spread all throughout your listeners in the country. That'd be amazing to have that be the goal.
Well, here's my thing. I'm going to remind you that all things are possible with God.
Amen. Amen.
I'm going to stop record. Hang on for 1 second. Guys, thank you so much for suspending your judgment to hear some really profound wisdom. At the end of the day, we all are humans having a human experience. And part of that human experience is contending with an ego, contending with lessons that hopefully put us on the trajectory of healing, but sometimes put us on the trajectory of hurt. And I encourage you all to just give a little bit more empathy to yourselves and to others. And in doing so, you are effectively being the change that we all wish to see in the world. So thank you so much. And I will put RJ's links in the notes. Please feel free to reach out and have a conversation. If nothing else, you will certainly, hopefully open up your heart a little bit more.